last night. So thanks everybody for being here bright and early. This is the start of 2 days we have 2 great days of sustainability sessions and talks. I'm Sue Craig, co-chair of the conference. So yeah, I'm gonna just let it get on because we have some great presentations, but thank you everyone for being here. And yeah, so the next 2 days, please feel free to join any of the sessions here because there's going to be some really interesting presentations, discussions, and we're going to hear from a lot of different people, very involved in the industry in many different aspects. And I think lots of lessons to learn too. So thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Laura Lee Johnstone, past president of Chamber of Mines, and Hecla, vice president. Really nice to see everybody in the crowd today. I am honored to take on Indigenous participation as the first session of the day, and really great to see so many people here this many days into the conference. Thank you. Our first panel today is Indigenous participation in power. And given that we have such a short period of time and such a great panel here, I'm not going to introduce everybody. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. But what I will say is thank you to the panel for agreeing to do this. I really appreciate it. These sessions today are intended to share your experience with Indigenous participation in the power space. We're all aware power is a critical topic in the Yukon, and I really appreciate your willingness to share your experience and your insights. So I'd like to start with each person. Please do a short introduction of yourself and your role. Gary.
That's good. Thanks a lot. Thank you for that. Amazing opportunity to be here with my colleagues and to chat about energy and more specifically around First Nations partnerships and how we move forward. Very exciting times, and of course there's amazing opportunities in front of us. My name is Gary Gazakis, President and CEO of Yukon Development Corporation. I was appointed to the position in May 2024. I've got 30 years of utility experience, worked with Brookfield in Ontario, Algonquin Power in Ontario, Northwest Territories Power Corps, and Yukon Energy. And then fortunately was appointed to the position of YDC or May 2024, as I mentioned. Just a little bit about YDC. YDC is not YEC. YDC owns YEC. We are the sole shareholder of the Power Corporation. We provide a little oversight. Mind you, they run their operations very tightly and they're doing a great job. Primarily our role there is around the financing piece to make sure that they have the funding available to do the work they need to do to keep the lights on. And then the second piece of YDC is really long-term planning. We are taking on the lead of and looking at the integrated resource plan, which includes the BC Yukon Grid Connect project. Just wanted to make that distinction because a lot of people still don't understand and recognize the role that YDC, Yukon Development Corporation, has in the Yukon. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tiffany Eckert-Murray. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Dadagai Development Corporation. Dadagai is the economic arm for the Ta'an Council, which we co-share this territory with Kwalindun. Our sole purpose and mandate is to make money for our First Nations so that we can increase our economic independence on government. And my involvement with energy is still relatively new. But I will say that we are super excited to be more in the space. I think there's some really dynamic examples out there of partnerships between development corporations and power companies, and excited to share my perspective. And Sheesh.
Good morning, Jay. My name is Jay Massey. I'm Vice President of Northern Development and Indigenous Relations for ATCO Electric. So my responsibilities here, the ATCO Electric Yukon, the utility here, that's mostly distribution. We have 12 power plants throughout the Yukon, but operate throughout the Yukon. I'm also responsible for 2 utilities we have in the NWT, Naka Power Utilities, those 2 over there, and mainly run Yellowknife distribution system over there and a couple other communities. Very similarly. also lead an Indigenous relations team in ATCO Electric that's responsible for consultation on projects down there. And I've been working for ATCO now for 36 years, and that whole time has been here in Whitehorse.
Thanks, Jay. I'm Tom Buzzell. I'm from Haines Junction, Yukon, and I'm the Director of Partnerships for Yukon Energy. My background really has been working with the feds for most of my career in Kelowna National Park, and then I've done a bunch of years with Champagne-Ajiac First Nation. During that time with Champagne-Ajiac, I was the lead negotiator when we worked with the Yukon government and Yukon Energy Corporation to figure out the energy agreements for the relicensing of the Ajiac Power Dam. So I've moved over into Yukon Energy now, where we continue to work on the assets that we own, keeping the permits on them going, working with the nations as we're going through the permitting and the water licensing process. And as Gary said, you know, YDC is a bit more of the longer term, the big future of where energy is going to be. What we're really trying to work on, and especially with nations right now, is what the shorter term future, you know, the 5 years coming up for the Whitehorse Power Centers, and looking into how we can get the grid stabilized and get what we need for the next several years before some of the bigger projects come on. Thank you.
Ben Tober, President and CEO of Borealis. We're a Yukon-founded propane supplier, but operate across North America now. One of the things I'm grateful for the Yukon is our ability as a private enterprise to partner with development corporations and others to perform our work on mine sites and other critical infrastructure sites across Canada now. But the blueprint we created here with partnerships with development corporations and how to create meaningful partnerships through asset ownership and other revenue shares to ensure that we're giving back in a sustainable way to the communities is the blueprint we use across Canada now. So some of the first partnerships we created here, the documentation from that is kind of how we do work now across Canada, because we do operate a lot in remote areas where there's no pipeline or cable connection to some of these communities. So we're very much a critical almost utility, but we truck the fuel in and we create power or we create heat at all these sites. So I'm excited to be part of the panel, and thank you.
Thanks, Ben. And the second question leads beautifully into after the introductions. You know, we all have been listening to the conference. There's a lot of energy at the conference, and we're going to certainly need a lot of energy to do half the things that we're talking about. And I think it's really great to see the participants at this panel. So the second question, and maybe I'll just start at you, Ben, and work backwards this time, is can you give some examples of how Indigenous participation has been incorporated into your business? I know you kind of led a bit into that into your introduction, but maybe you could just go a little deeper.
Yeah, sure. Obviously, with our business, we deal a lot with the private enterprises or publicly traded mining, essentially in the north, with critical minerals being so essential. There's a lot of these big projects happening where there's a demand for infrastructure on site. You know, in the Yukon, essentially is an island, right? You create your own power, and there's no natural gas pipelines or anything else. So when we started looking at some of these projects, they sit on traditional territories of the Anishinaabe and others around the Yukon. And first thing we did is we went to their development corporation and we said, how do we participate? How do we approach this mine? And that was the mindset we took right from the beginning, was we're going to start with the nation first, and then we'll get the introductions and set that up and make sure it's right, and then approach the mines about our offering. And you know, there's kind of three things to it. There's making sure that there's a meaningful relationship there, so there's a revenue share in place. We also provide very good, expensive assets to these mine sites, and large storage tanks or power generators in some cases we're doing in BC now. And what we did, and the things we talked about with specifically with the Anishinaabe was, hey, we have to buy these assets anyway. They're good assets to be on your books. They're critical infrastructures. They're going to go on site and they're going to sit there for the life of the mine. Would you guys be interested in owning these assets? And it was really a really good deal, actually, we worked out with them. And now at a lot of the sites we operate in Canada, the First Nation or the Development Corporation actually owns our tanks, and we supply the propane through those tanks. So they're getting more of a ownership on site, their flag on the site as well, and that has really been meaningful for us and for the nation. So that was one thing that we've done and we're continuing to do across Canada.
I think I'll break it down sort of into two streams. There's keeping the assets that we have at Yukon Energy right now, our three main hydro assets, our current generation, our diesel and LNG generation that we own, and how we have First Nations participation in those and future opportunities to invest. But through the water relicensing process is sort of the model that we've taken on is to create a relationship with the government in the traditional territory where that asset is. So for AGS with the Champagne-Asiac, Tonquatching Council, Kwanlin Dun, CTFN for here in Whitehorse, and Natranaik Dun and Mayo. And as we're working through this process, and we're getting to the water board hearing where we're going to potentially get our new license, it's really building that relationship and building a set of agreements in some of the cases where we work together through permitting processes. We work together with the regulators, and those agreements also set out how future energy investments will look outside of those assets. So it's really lays out a structure where the Yukon government's involved in some of them, the First Nations governments are involved, and as well as YEC, where we can come together when we're in the permitting processes, build that relationship, be with the nations when they're seeing our applications, I guess, before they go to YESA or to the water board, instead of seeing them after the fact, right? That's really something that we picked up to do a little differently here. And in those agreements, it really sets out what the future looks like for Yukon Energy owned assets for those nations to be able to participate. And how we start that participation, how they push it on to DevCorps, whatever may happen. But it's really building the relationships right into the lands department and the heritage departments, the finance departments, when we're looking at these relicensings of the current assets that keep the power on in the Yukon, and getting the involvement of the nations back into those as we look forward. And then, like I say, those agreements really set up the situation where we can have discussions on what future energy investments look like for nations.
Yeah, I'll break it down in a couple streams too, I guess. So our involvement, one is on projects and one is on business partnerships. So just on the project side, thinking, I'll start in Alberta. Just recently, ATCO finished a major projects, solar projects, just outside of Calgary. One was 31 megawatts and one was 41 megawatts in size. So just perspective, 72 megawatts. The grid last night at 5 o'clock was 75 megawatts here in the Yukon. So just to give you an idea of the size of those. Those two projects are owned 51% by two First Nations, and the other 49% is by ATCO. So ATCO brings the technology and the project management side of it. North, I would look in northern Alberta. ATCO finished a few years ago, finished a large transmission project, goes up to Fort McMurray. It was the longest 500 kV project in Canada at the time. There was extensive consultation, of course, on 500 kilometers of power lines, so there was 27 nations. With the good conversations that happened there, they built a caribou protection plan for the project. So really integrated all the wildlife along the project, wildlife mitigation right into the project. So that worked out really well. In the end, that project, it was $1.6 billion. 7 of those nations are co-owners of that project now. They own 40% of that transmission line, which is a great success. On the business partnership side, as I mentioned in the NWT, the utilities we operate over there, Naka Power Utilities, that's a partnership that goes back almost 40 years for ATCO. So we have a 50-50 partnership with Day Investments Incorporated in those utilities. So they are owners of the utility over there. Day represents 27 Dene nations in the NWT. So I was just over at a board meeting and reported into the ownership just last month. So on the business partnership side, of course, that's been a great success, long-standing partnership, and of course closer to home here in the Yukon, just in the 4 isolated communities we operate. Each community has a community-sized renewable project. So the First Nation owns the renewable project. It hooks into our grid. We coordinate with them to just keep the lights on, and the projects are big enough that they're able to supply their own community with their renewable projects. So 3 are solar, 1 is wind. The last one will be up and operating in Watson Lake next year. So it's been a big success.
I guess I get the easy part because as the Indigenous company that often people want to come work with, a couple things I do want to say. The chair of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition, Mark Podolsky, shared with us at a message last year that equity is the strongest form of consent. And so that's what I want to share with you all today, which if you can take away one thing, equity is the strongest form of consent. Okay, this is not, we've come a long way in 53 years when Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow was first delivered and a new approach to self-government was enacted in Yukon specifically. We've done so much in 53 years and I can't wait to see what the next 53 years is going to look like, because we're in a new era right now where before it's not us and them or you or us, it's our Yukon. We all want power in here. We all want opportunities here. We all want projects to benefit. But what I'll say is, think of the first time you went to meet your in-laws' place. You probably dressed really nice. You even maybe brought a nice little gift for them, and you wanted to be on your best behavior. It's no different when you're engaging with nations. You're probably very nervous. You don't really know what to do. You don't really know what to say. You don't know how their humor is going to be. But it's just be honest about what you want, because chances are they want the same thing as well. They may not understand it, and I'll just be patient, because there's no limit to what we can do. We have such great people working for us now. Half of them are our own people that are working for it, and so having to go back and sell the project over, it's a great era to be in the Yukon. It's a great era to be doing business in the Yukon right now, and the limits are endless. And so what I'll say is there's so much great work out there. Michael Saba from Hydro Quebec. He always talked about their hydro project, and if you guys want the partnership bad enough, they will make it happen. And so, it's like I said, it's a great time right now, and it's not going to be. I'll leave it at that front. Is that just don't give up hope. The biggest part is going to be taking the time to asking the questions, building that relationship, because you have to build trust. Just like when you're trying to build the trust of your future in-laws or whatever, you're going to want to build that trust with them. And the same thing goes when you're building partnerships with Indigenous communities, is that we have to learn to trust you, want to trust you. And taking the time to do it right the first time, you're going to save yourself a whole lot of headache. Ashish.
I've got a number of examples that I'd like to share. I guess I'll take a bit of a step back. I do see why DC is a facilitator of energy projects. I think we're extremely uniquely positioned to build relationships and partnerships with First Nations rights holders as well as development corporations. And what we've been doing and continue to do is weave, and I'll use the word weave, First Nations into the energy conversation, because what that means to me is that they become the fabric of what we're trying to build here in terms of energy. And so that's a key item for us at Yukon Development Corporation as we move forward. But examples, we've got the Innovative Renewable Energy Initiative through YDC, and a number of successful projects that the solar project in Watson Lake. Hudson's here. He ran that for YDC for a few years. Give me a few more examples, Hudson. I'm putting you on the spot. Exactly, and a number of others. So we continue to do that. There's been a number of other projects that have actually come in through last year to make sure that these are moving forward. Another example is, and one we're quite excited about is fairly new, but what YDC wants to do is to engage with nations, have those conversations, and to develop the community energy plan specifically for East First Nation. We've offered that, and we've been having conversations with First Nations now to actually co-develop their community energy plans, because there's nothing better than nations understanding the actual potential they have on their traditional territory, identifying it, and then First Nations bringing those forward in the future. So our plan right now is to think, if you think through process, we have community energy planning, identifying projects. We have an ERIE program which funds projects to feasibility. The next step in that is YDC looking at financing, packaging such that projects go from feasibility into production and then projects to completion. And so that's the piece that's missing to an extent. We need to, work with Canadian Infrastructure Bank. We need to continue to work with Loan Guarantee Program and the federal government and the Yukon government to continue these local renewable energy projects to move forward. Because in my opinion, we're leading the grid project, but it's not the grid project or not and nothing else. We need all the energy we can get. We know that. When we have mining entities like Casino looking at, establishing a significant footprint here and a large consumer of energy, one hydro facility won't do it. It absolutely won't. And so, the actual partnerships with the grid project moving forward as well are very exciting, and we've had some great conversation and movement on that front as well.
Thanks, these are really exciting. We could do this. And really honor the work that's been done in what you guys have all shared here today.
Well, I guess I'll go first. So, I mean, experiences, well, I'll focus on the grid project, recognizing there's so many other things, and I don't want that to be the focal point, because we need all the energy we can get. But, we've had amazing conversations, and I'll state with Casca, not all communities are absolutely on board, but that's okay. I mean, this is a journey that we all have to take together. There are some of the Casca communities that want to start tomorrow, which has been fantastic. So that's been a great experience. And then, from a lessons learned perspective, I think the key is, you mentioned the trust piece. And I think, is Stu here? Stu Van Bibber? I think he's here somewhere. I mean, the biggest thing Stu said to me over and over again, it's trust, and it's time, and it's moving at the pace of your partners. And, I think from a lessons learned perspective, it was more the time side. Earning trust, getting in, listening to the communities is critical, but it's also the time piece, is that, making sure that there's not that pressure, and you're giving the time needed for communities to think through, what this looks like, what the impacts are. Obviously supporting them in identifying those items, but in general, that time and trust piece is probably the biggest lesson learned, and take that for myself moving forward as we continue to build the relationships. So
I'll leave this on. It's just beginning is where I want to say. Like right now, we've for the longest time we were kind of all worrying about our own individual territories and taking care of our backyards. But now we're starting to unite a little bit, because again, like I said, this is our Yukon, and so The most exciting thing that I think we're part of is we have Yukon First Nation Energy Corporation, Energy Company, limited partnership. And what that is all 14 Yukon First Nations coming together to work on joint energy projects. So that's just beginning, it's just starting, but together we can accomplish everything, because what's really important to us is that this is not just for the benefit of Ta'an or Kwalindun or Teslin or anybody else. This is for the benefit of all of Yukon. Anything that impacts all of our traditional territory, we have to be part of this. We have to all be part of the same conversation. We have to all work together. We have to all have a piece of this pie, because at the end of the day, I can remember, like, not over here, but like we used to go to Minto Crossing and catch fish, and we haven't been able to do that. And my daughter hasn't been able to experience fish camp with her grandmother. Like, I grew up with that, and I'm so incredibly thankful and lucky. So it's important that we all work together, because we all feel the impact of this together, and together we all Yukon First Nations are starting to come together, because we all want the same things to happen. And I just want to echo again, like, time and taking the time the first time, because we've had those salesmen come through our doors, and they can sell us energy projects, and they can say everything, but showing up and answering that phone when they call, because what may seem like a silly question is giving them comfort. So putting the time in at the very front is always going to pay dividends in the very end. Ganshish.
For me, I think this is such an exciting time in the Yukon on the energy front. So, like we need a new energy supply or more energy supply, and whether it's the transmission connect to BC, or we find our own energy supply in the territory, as we have done since power is first introduced here. There's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be invested in and built. And I think it's such a great opportunity for the First Nations, not only on the equity side of these projects, but again, the ownership side. I really think there are some great models out there. There's a great conversation to be had here in the Yukon. I keep talking to the First Nations about, and they're there, entering the energy economy. So it's not about energy autonomy. That's fairly difficult to do. But the first step is entering the energy economy. That's a great step forward. We're going to need it for quite a while, I think. And we have some huge opportunities right in front of us. So it really is an exciting time for that. And I guess the learning out of that is early and often engagement. Engagement is the big one. The education and ensuring that the First Nation communities just are understanding what their needs are on the energy front really expands from there. As soon as they understand how much energy it takes to do everything they want to do in their community, it's really easy to get involved in the project side.
I really see it with us. There's the opportunity for the investment and the equity ownership. Lots of those were established by the nations that had hydro in their backyard through Chapter 22. We've been a long time trying to get a lot of those implemented. We're trying to get started. But what we really heard from the governments when we sat down with them to negotiate agreements on these facilities that exist, the equity was part of it. The ownership was part. But one of the biggest concerns is how the resources in their backyard are being used and how they can participate in saying how they're going to be used. So through the agreements, it sets up these multi-group panels between Yukon government, the nations, YEC, and we're prepping for the water board hearings. We're prepping for the next regulatory phase. So whether that be AGS Dam that has been there since the 70s and gone through many regulatory phases, or the next big thing that comes out in power that we build here new, it is going to go through regulatory phases, as we all know, on multi-year schedules for the rest of its time, for how it uses water, what fuel it burns, its impact on the planet. It's going to always be going through regulatory, and it's in someone's backyard. So for the nations to be able to sit down at the table before this hits, say, a water board hearing, and get their concerns for salmon here in the Yukon River up front, and how they pass the dam and how we can improve those things of passages, have been really what we've been hearing from the nations are as important in participation in the energy environment as the ownership of it. Not less or more important, but equally. And done by really different arms, right? Those are really done by the people in the office, in the lands departments, the heritage departments. The investments more is leaning towards folks like Tiffany in the Dev Corps. A lot of those get handed over, but this ongoing engagement, every time we need a noise and sound air emissions permit, every time you need a water use license, every time you want to do a small expansion and clear some land and go through YESA, it has the nations involved and at that table. We're not bringing projects to them and putting them on their table and fighting at the water board or the hearings anymore. We still go to the hearings with some disagreements. We're not agreeing on everything. That is very clear. But each party before those hearings knows what we agree on and what we don't, and we're sharing that. And hopefully to make these processes keep flowing, because we can build all the new energy resources in the Yukon that we need, but they will, for the lifetime of them, go through permitting processes that need the local nations whose those assets are in their backyard to be involved through those processes to make sure that they're managed right.
All great conversations. I think from a lessons learned standpoint, I share the same sentiment to everyone. I think that's really important, is the patient part of it, in early engagement, and answer your phone and have conversation. And one of the things I learned through, years of doing this now with having these partnerships is start communicating more. Even though once the deal's done, don't stop communicating. Like these projects that are being developed on the traditional territory, new opportunities come up all the time, and sometimes they're missed by the development corp because the communication isn't there. So one of the things that we try to do, and we're trying to do more of, is have more of these communications more regularly, maybe once a quarter, and share what we know from site, so they have an idea of what's going on and can understand what's going on in their land and on projects. So, and yes, it is exciting times. I'm listening to everything here as a private business owner, and my suggestion to all private business owners that are in the Yukon or want to do work in the Yukon is start having these conversations with DevCorps now, because the opportunities are endless in the Yukon, especially with the energy that I'm hearing from ATCO and Yukon Energy, that this grid connection for the feds are looking at supporting is it's phenomenal. I'm really excited for the Yukon and excited to be here. So thank you.
Thanks, you guys. We went a little bit over, I hope people will bear with us, but these things are just really important. I'm honored to have everybody here. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think today demonstrates, Tiffany, we grew up here,
Yeah.
that the world is changing in a good direction, and I'm really proud of the work that everybody on this panel has done and my ability to participate in it. So thank you all for being willing to do this and share your stories. In lieu of gifts this year, we are donating for each individual to the Imagination Library for kids in the Yukon. So, thank you, everybody.